Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really interesting question. Could Cyrus the Great actually be Dhul Qarnayn from the religious texts?
It's a persistent idea, but yeah, there are challenges.
We've got some material here that really pushes back against that identification.
Right, lays out several arguments. Our job is to, well, unpack those.
Exactly. So let's start with the physical side of things. Archaeology.
Okay.
The source claims Cyrus didn't really build much, not even a palace for himself, apparently.
Which is a bit surprising for such a major ruler.
And it specifically mentions the Great Wall of Gorgon.
Yeah.
Sometimes people connect that to Dhul Qarnayn's wall or dam.
Right, the one in the Isu reference.
Yeah. But the claim is, well, Herodotus, Xenophon, they don't mention it.
No contemporary accounts of Cyrus building that specific structure.
If Dhul Qarnayn's big thing was building this massive barrier,
then the lack of connection to Cyrus is, well, noticeable. It's a gap, isn't it?
It really is. Okay, then there's the question of his beliefs. Religion.
This is a tricky one.
The Cyrus cylinder. It quotes him, doesn't it? Asking Babylonian gods for help.
Yes, asking Marduk and others for blessings, long life for himself and his son.
So the source asks, can someone doing that really be seen as a strict monotheist?
It complicates the picture, certainly.
Yeah.
How does that invocation fit with the image of Dhul Qarnayn often held in monotheistic traditions?
Yeah, it raises questions about maybe different understandings of piety back then, or if the identification is just off.
Precisely. It flags a potential, let's say, theological inconsistency.
Then there's the textual evidence within the religious traditions themselves.
Ah, yes. The hadith literature.
The challenge thrown down is find one single hadith, just one, from the key authorities.
That explicitly says Cyrus is Dhul Qarnayn.
Right. And the implication is that, well, you can't.
The absence of that direct endorsement within the tradition itself is presented as quite telling. Suggests it might be a later idea, perhaps from outside the core texts.
Okay, what about other perspectives? The source brings up the Jewish viewpoint.
Yes. The author apparently asked some American Jews directly. Found they generally don't make that connection. No Cyrus as Dhul Qarnayn belief.
And it also mentions Ka'b al-Ahbar.
Right, a prominent early figure, a Jewish convert to Islam.
What did he say?
He apparently identified Dhul Qarnayn differently as a king from Yemen.
So an alternative tradition right there from an early relevant source.
Exactly. It shows there wasn't necessarily a single agreed-upon identification and provides a specific counterexample with roots in Jewish tradition.
Okay, one last specific point. Interpreting a particular verse.
وَإِذَا جَاوَدُوا رَبَجَالَهُ دَكَّةً.
Yes, that one. The argument presented is that Dhaka refers to the huge earthquake on the Day of Judgment.
Okay.
And the source then claims that this specific concept, this kind of apocalyptic earthquake,
wasn't part of the belief system in ancient Persia. Not even for Zoroastrians.
that's the assertion. So another fundamental disconnect in their worldview compared to the narrative surrounding Dhul Qarnayn.
If the eschatology, the end times beliefs, don't align, it makes the identification harder to sustain, according to this argument.
So let's quickly recap the main points against this link, based on our source material.
Okay.
Lack of solid building evidence connecting Cyrus to the famous barrier.
Right.
Questions raised by his own words invoking Babylonian gods.
The monotheism question?
The apparent absence of explicit support in core religious texts like the Hadith.
Crucial point.
Alternative identifications found in Jewish tradition, like the king from Yemen.
Yep.
And finally, this interpretation of a key verse suggesting different beliefs about the Day of Judgment.
It's quite a list of counter-arguments.
It really is. So taking all this together, it paints a picture where the Cyrus-Dhul Qarnayn connection seems, well, quite contested.
Definitely challenged by this particular set of arguments, which leads to a final thought for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Given these points, if maybe Cyrus isn't the figure, who else could be? Or is Dhul Qarnayn perhaps more symbolic? What does this whole process tell us about how historical figures get woven into religious stories over time?
Something to ponder. That's all for this deep dive.